Welcome to this deep dive, and today we're going all the way down the rabbit hole of nosleep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with a Reddit post called, "I died for 6 minutes in 2003. Heaven isn't what we think it is."
Right. A first-person account that kind of flips the typical near-death experience on its head.
Exactly. The narrator claims that instead of this peaceful afterlife, he's subjected to some pretty intense manipulation and some horrifying revelations.
Okay.
So let's dive into the details and see what makes this account so disturbing.
Yeah.
The narrator, a 15-year-old at the time, experiences sudden cardiac arrest while walking home from school. His heart stops for a full 6 minutes.
6 minutes. That's an incredibly long time for the heart to stop. I mean, it's really on the edge of what's survivable.
Yeah, and the narrator, who we'll call John,
Okay.
does survive, but not without consequences. He mentions needing an ablation, a procedure to correct irregular heart rhythms as well as a pacemaker, and he talks about facing mountains of medical debt. It's a stark reminder that even surviving a near-death experience can have long-lasting repercussions.
Absolutely. It's not just about the physical trauma, but the financial and emotional burdens that follow.
Right, and during those 6 minutes of cardiac arrest, John recounts a vivid experience of what he believes to be the afterlife. He describes ascending through a bright light passing through gates.
Okay.
But instead of meeting benevolent beings, he encounters entities he describes as cruel and manipulative.
It's a fascinating departure from the typical near-death experience narrative, which often emphasizes feelings of peace and the presence of loving guides.
Yeah, this account is decidedly darker.
Definitely.
John says these beings treated him like a captive, shackling him and revealing this chilling truth that our universe is essentially a farm designed to cultivate souls for their use as slaves on a higher plane.
Soul harvesting. It's a concept that touches on some deeply unsettling philosophical questions about free will and the nature of reality.
For sure, it flips the script on the idea that our lives have inherent meaning or purpose if we're just resources to be exploited. It raises questions about the value we place on human life.
It's almost like a cosmic horror story where we're not the protagonists, but rather unwitting pawns in a grander and much more sinister narrative.
And that's where it gets really interesting. John describes his time with these beings as agonizing, filled with psychological torment. He even compares it to the soul pain of losing a loved one, multiplied exponentially.
That's a powerful image, and it makes you wonder, even if we dismiss this as a hallucination, why would John's mind conjure up such a bleak and unsettling vision?
Right, it speaks to a certain level of existential dread, a fear of the unknown that perhaps we all share to some extent. So upon waking, John tries to share his experience with others, but as you can imagine, he's met with skepticism.
It's understandable. Such a profound and disturbing experience would be difficult to reconcile with the everyday reality most people experience.
Exactly. Eventually, even John starts to doubt himself, attributing the experience to trauma or to death dream. But years later, something happens that reignites his belief in what he experienced. He meets an author who has written a popular book about his own supposedly blissful near-death experience.
Okay, what happened to the author contradict John's experience?
Not exactly. John says that something in the author's eyes told him that he knew the truth about the afterlife, the truth about these beings, but chose to lie about it in his book.
That's interesting. It adds a layer of conspiracy to the narrative. What motivations could this author have for hiding the truth? Was it fear, a desire to protect humanity from a disturbing reality?
Those are great questions. And ultimately, years later, John shares his experience on Reddit's nosleep, a forum for sharing scary stories. It's an interesting choice of platform, given the expectation that the stories shared there are, at least within the context of the subreddit, assumed to be true.
It certainly adds a layer of ambiguity to the narrative. Is John seeking validation, or is he trying to warn others about what he believes to be the true nature of the afterlife?
That's what we're here to unpack. Now, the Reddit post garners a mixed bag of reactions, ranging from those who take it at face value, expressing fear and concern, to those who analyze it from a more skeptical perspective.
Which is to be expected. It's a story that pushes the boundaries of belief, forcing us to confront some uncomfortable possibilities about the nature of reality and our place in it.
Exactly, and it's the diversity of these reactions that makes John's story so fascinating. It acts as a mirror, reflecting our own individual belief, fears, and hopes about what lies beyond. So we're diving deep into the reactions to this unsettling account, and it's fascinating to see how John's story sparks these different interpretations.
Yeah.
Some commenters suggest maybe he didn't experience heaven, but rather stumbled into some other dimension or even hell.
It's interesting how people try to fit this experience into existing frameworks, even if they don't quite align.
Right.
But it also highlights this human need to categorize and make sense of the unknown, especially when it comes to something as profound as the afterlife.
Absolutely. And it's not just about fitting it into a religious framework. There are those who bring in ideas from Buddhism, proposing that maybe John misidentified those beings and his fear kind of shaped his perception.
That's a compelling perspective. Buddhism emphasizes the impermanent nature of reality and how our perceptions can be influenced by our mental state. It challenges us to consider that John's experience, even if genuinely felt, might not represent an objective truth about the afterlife, but rather a reflection of his internal world.
It really underscores the subjective nature of these experiences. And it's worth noting that some comments even touch on the possibility of DMT playing a role in John's visions.
Right, the spirit molecule, as it's often called DMT, is a powerful psychedelic compound found naturally in the human brain, and some research suggests it's released during periods of extreme stress or trauma like near-death experiences.
So even if we set aside the question of whether John's experience was objectively real, could DMT have induced these incredibly vivid and disturbing hallucinations?
It's definitely a possibility. Studies have shown that DMT can induce profound altered states of consciousness, often characterized by intense visuals, emotional shifts, and even encounters with entities. Some researchers even hypothesize that DMT might be connected to the brain's ability to create near-death experiences.
Now that raises even more questions. If DMT can trigger such powerful experiences, what does that tell us about the nature of consciousness and the potential of the human mind to create its own realities?
It's fascinating, isn't it? It challenges our assumptions about what we perceive as real. Could it be that what we call reality is just one layer of a much more complex and multidimensional existence, and substances like DMT allow us to glimpse these other layers?
It's a mind-bending concept. And even if John's experience was a DMT-fueled hallucination, it doesn't diminish the power of his story to make us question our assumptions and explore the mysteries of consciousness. After all, isn't that part of what makes Jar No Sleep so compelling? Delving into the darkness and confronting our deepest fears, even if they're just products of our own minds.
Absolutely. It's a safe space to explore the boundaries of belief and imagination, and it's not just about fear. John's account also taps into a deeper human desire to understand our place in the cosmos. Even if it turns out to be a fictional narrative, it forces us to grapple with questions about purpose and meaning in a potentially indifferent universe.
It really throws a wrench into any comforting notions we might have about a benevolent afterlife. Instead, it presents a universe that's indifferent to our existence, maybe even hostile. It makes you reconsider the value we place on human life if we're essentially just cogs in a cosmic machine.
And that's where it gets really interesting from a philosophical perspective. John's experience, even if fictional, aligns with certain deterministic philosophies that challenge the idea of free will. If we're pre-programmed for a specific purpose, as this soul harvesting concept suggests, where does that leave our sense of agency and choice?
It's almost like we're back in the ancient Greek tragedies where the gods toy with human lives for their amusement, but instead of gods, we have these advanced beings from a higher plane who see us as mere resources.
Exactly. It's a shift in power dynamics that's both terrifying and thought-provoking, and it forces us to ask if free will is an illusion. What does that mean for concepts like morality and responsibility?
Those are huge questions, and it makes you wonder if the author John encountered the one who supposedly lied about his own near-death experience was grappling with those same questions. Maybe he chose to present a more palatable version of the afterlife, not out of fear, but out of a desire to preserve a sense of hope and meaning for humanity.
That's a really interesting interpretation. It suggests that sometimes, even facing a potentially bleak reality, we might choose to uphold comforting narratives, not because they're necessarily true, but because they help us navigate the complexities of existence.
It makes you think about the role of belief systems, both religious and secular, in shaping our understanding of the world. We create narratives to explain the unknown, even if those narratives are ultimately flawed or incomplete.
And that's where the power of stories like John's comes in. They challenge those narratives, force us to confront uncomfortable truths, and push us to reconsider our assumptions about reality. Even if they're entirely fictional, they can spark profound philosophical and existential questions.
And in that sense, even a chilling account like John's can be a valuable tool for self-reflection and critical thinking. It pushes us beyond the surface level and into the murky depths of human consciousness and our place in the universe.
It's a reminder that even in the age of science and reason, There are still mysteries that elude our grasp, experiences that defy easy explanation, and perhaps by embracing those mysteries, we can expand our understanding of what it means to be human.
Now, speaking of understanding, while we've been exploring the philosophical implications of John's experience, there's also the scientific side to consider. Near-death experiences are a documented phenomenon, even if we don't fully understand them, and there are fascinating theories about the role of oxygen deprivation, neurochemicals, and even the dying brain itself in triggering these vivid visions.
Absolutely. While we can't definitively say what causes near-death experiences, exploring the scientific explanations can shed light on the remarkable capabilities of the human brain, especially in moments of extreme stress.
So let's dive into that next. We'll explore how the brain might be creating these experiences, even if they're not glimpses into an actual afterlife. So we've explored all these philosophical rabbit holes that this story opens up, but what about the science behind near-death experiences? Could there be a biological basis for these seemingly supernatural events?
Well, there are several scientific theories that try to explain these experiences without invoking the paranormal. One of the most prominent focuses on the role of oxygen deprivation.
Right, when the brain is starved of oxygen, as it would be during cardiac arrest, it can start to malfunction, leading to hallucinations and altered states of consciousness. So is it possible that John's journey, the light, the gates, even the sinister beings were just his oxygen-deprived brain firing off random signals?
It's a very plausible explanation. Think of it this way. The brain is this pattern-seeking machine. It's constantly striving to create order and meaning.
Right.
When it's faced with the chaos of oxygen deprivation, it scrambles to make sense of the situation, drawing on existing memories, beliefs, and even cultural narratives.
So in John's case, his Christian upbringing, and perhaps even a subconscious fear of death, could have shaped the imagery and narrative of his experience.
Exactly. And let's not forget the intense emotional component.
Right.
John describes his experience as agonizing, filled with this profound sense of dread. And this is where the role of neurochemicals comes in.
During stressful situations, the brain releases a flood of hormones and neurotransmitters, some of which, like adrenaline and cortisol, can trigger feelings of fear and anxiety.
Precisely. And these heightened emotions, combined with the altered state of consciousness caused by oxygen deprivation, could amplify the intensity and the perceived reality of these hallucinations.
It's like the brain is on overdrive, creating this hyper-real experience that feels more real than reality itself.
And then there's the dying brain hypothesis, which suggests that as brain function shuts down, neural activity can create a surge of energy that manifests as vivid hallucinations, often with themes of light tunnels and out-of-body experiences.
So it's like the brain's last hurrah, this final burst of electrical activity before fading to black.
It's a fascinating concept, and while these scientific explanations might demystify near-death experiences for some, they don't necessarily diminish the profound impact they can have on individuals.
Right, regardless of the underlying cause. These experiences can be life-altering, leading people to reevaluate their priorities, beliefs, and even their entire sense of self.
And that brings us back to John's story.
Okay.
Even if we accept a scientific explanation, it still leaves us with some intriguing questions. Why did his brain construct such a bleak and unsettling vision of the afterlife? What does it reveal about his deepest fears and anxieties?
It's a reminder that even if we can explain the biological mechanisms behind these experiences, there's still a psychological and existential layer that we can't ignore.
Exactly. And that's where the power of stories like John's lies. It challenges us to think critically, to examine our own beliefs about life and death, and to acknowledge the vast unknowns that still exist at the edge of human understanding.
So while we might never know for sure whether John glimpsed another reality or simply experienced a complex hallucination, his story serves as a powerful reminder of the mysteries that still surround consciousness, the brain, and the ultimate question of what happens when we die.
Perhaps the most valuable takeaway is the recognition that our current understanding is limited. There's still so much we don't know. And embracing that uncertainty, that sense of wonder, can be just as enriching as seeking definitive answers.
Beautifully said. So as we conclude this deep dive, we leave you with this thought, whether you interpret John's experience as a supernatural event or a product of his own mind. It highlights the enduring human need to grapple with the unknown, to make sense of the mysteries of existence.
And maybe in that struggle, in that constant questioning, we find a deeper appreciation for the fragility and preciousness of our own lives.